Well, it's been a long time in between videos. I've been positively busy these past several weeks, or months actually, I'm happy to report. And now I'm back. So today, I'm going to begin part one of a multi-part series detailing and telling you about the link between Saturn and the occult, mainly the secret societies and how the government is tied in. I hope to reveal some new insights and shed some light into the role that Saturn has played and is still playing in secret societies in the occult world, as well as governments and organizations up till now. So stay tuned. And 3, 2, 1, here we go. We're going to talk about the connection between Saturn and the secret societies in the occult world. But first, we have to cover a little bit of the preliminaries, so bear with me. I hope you find this interesting. I think you will, actually. So in these modern times in the world of religion and government, and also the occult, particularly the remaining secret societies, there is a very important facet to the connection between these governments and also religions, and that is their connection with secret societies, and also the use of the planet Saturn. Now, Saturn is referred to in the ancient world as the Lord of the Rings. Well, of course, he is the Lord of the Rings after all. Just have a good look at Saturn. And what's a prominent feature? The rings, right? Saturn is ever represented and known for its mysterious rings, and takes us back into the ancient world, especially in ancient Rome, where men were told to exchange rings with their partner when they got married. That's where that custom more or less came from, although there were also other ancient cultures that had similar traditions. So they, in fact, were getting married before the Lord. And, of course, you wear a wedding ring to seal your vows in the presence of the Lord, which was and is Saturn. Circles and rings were used in different religions across the world, as I mentioned before, in order to show the importance of the planet Saturn in religion. Generally speaking, throughout the world, it would be appropriate to shed some light on the ideas and talk about the original Hebrew religion, because it plays a prominent role in this discussion tonight. So let's have a look at the ancient Hebrew religion and where it came from and how it has progressed from then over the many centuries and years up till today, up till this very day. It is a fact that Saturn dominates the Hebrew religion. It also dominates many of the other religions of the world. If we examine them carefully, this becomes very obvious, especially, or should I say particularly, in the Middle East. Originally, there was an ancient religion, but of course it wasn't Hebrew or Jewish. So, if we go back to the Middle East, we could find that it was probably more Egyptian than it was Jewish at the very beginning. However, the Jewish people are what we call the Jewish people back then. At that time, they were given a different name, actually, and I'll elaborate there. Sorry, tongue-tied. I will elaborate a little more on that further in on the talk. So, at that time, the dominating worship in that period in Egypt, in the Middle East, and the entire area was in fact the worship of the moon. Moon worship was extremely important, and the veneration and very mention of the moon god is recorded in history, particularly the Egyptians, who put a lot more importance on moon worship and veneration than peoples in other areas. It was very prominent throughout Egypt. With the moon god, when we talk about Egypt, and if you were in Egypt at that time, and if you were looking east in the middle of the Sinai desert, there is an enormously high mountain range. And so the people on the Egyptian side of the Sinai would look eastward. And every evening from around 6 p.m. Or thereabouts, the moon would rise up from the mountain, or it would give the appearance of doing so. So the ancients started naming the moon, and the moon became known as the old man of the mountain. And so the moon is named, like I said, the old man of the mountain, and the old man of the mountain's name was called Sin. Are you following me? Okay, so anyway, Sin was actually the name of the moon god in the ancient world, particularly in this region, and the mountain was named Ai, A-I. Therefore, when we put the two together, Sin, S-I-N, and A-I became Mount Sinai. And this is why the Hebrews today, as they did many centuries ago, have a lunar calendar based on the phases of the moon. They trace their beginnings of each and every day from sundown to sundown. Why do they do this? Because that's when the moon comes out, of course. Okay, it's all based on the moon. A lunar calendar is what they use. Now, first of all was the moon, and then later on Jupiter started coming into the picture. In ancient Hebrew worship, Jupiter, because the ancient word patar, P-A-T-A-R, in the Phoenician Canaanite language, it was known as Piter, P-I-T-E-R. So the ancient name for the Jews, going back from what I mentioned a little bit earlier, was actually I-U. U. In the King's English, the Old English word for the word Jew wasn't actually spelt J-E-W, but rather spelt I-U or I-O-U. So I-U was Jew, and Pater or Pitter meant the father. So it became known as the father of the Jews and was pronounced as I-U Pater or I-U Pitter. So it is important to know that I and J's in the Hebrew language are interchangeable. So now it becomes J-U Pater or J-U Pitter, what we now call Jupiter. At this point, Jupiter became very important in the Jewish religion. And then from the changing of the astrological age of Aries, from blowing the ram's horn to Pisces, you now move on to the Christian age. So today in the Vatican we can see a statue of St. Peter if you go there. But actually it doesn't represent Peter, but rather Pater, Father God Pater. And you put J-U in front of it and it becomes Jupiter. Okay, so that's at the beginning of the Christian dispensation. And now within the last half century, Jupiter has been eclipsed and it has kind of gone into quietude. And from this period onwards, the main planet, even today, is Saturn. Okay, now Saturn, as I mentioned earlier, is referred to as Lord of the Rings. And as I said earlier, Saturn today is actually the god of the Hebrews. Okay, so we've progressed, and Saturn now is the god of the Hebrews. In the Old Phoenician Canaanite language, you will spell the name Saturn as Sabbath, but they spelt it with an H, so Shabbath, Shabbath, or Sabbath. All right, good. So when you hear in the Ten Commandments, remember to keep holy the Sabbath, you have to remember the Sabbath is the Phoenician name for the planet Saturn. Saturn, as a god, was always called the god of the black robe. And black is a very important color in both Judaism as well as Christianity, particularly the Catholic Church. Because black represents Saturn, Saturn is the god who was a judge over all of mankind. This is why judges in courtrooms, even to this day, wear a black robe. Sabbath also has another interpretation. Saturn, as we know, is the seventh planet. He is also sometimes represented as the Grim Reaper, the father of time. All the little details are very interesting once we examine everything about Saturn and its numbers that are applied to it, as well as the colors and all these finer aspects. And we get an idea about chronology from Saturn. So we have something called a calendar, Chronia calendar. Because Saturn was in the Greek language called Cronus. Another reason why Saturn was important is because Saturn was understood to be the inhibitor, the one who holds you back in life. That's why when you are celebrating your God on the Sabbath, you do no work. It is a day of complete rest, because the ancients said, if Saturn is the inhibitor who holds us back, then there is no need to do anything. There is absolutely no point to it. However, he doesn't have to hold us back. We'll simply just not do anything on the Sabbath. So that was the origin of that. There is a way Saturn became known as inhibitor, and because it's circled, ancient man didn't know there were any other planets, out in the solar system beyond Saturn. So they assumed that Saturn was the bottom line. He is the one that holds us together. And Saturn is still important to this day in Middle Eastern religions and the Arabic region. Let's examine the Star of David for a minute. The Star of David is a six-pointed star. Well, the six-pointed star is actually referred to by the reference works as a hex or a hexagram. Hex simply means 6, which incidentally in the Bible is assigned as the number of man. 6 is the number of man. So, how do you spell 6 in relation? It is sex. S-E-X. Therefore, 6 is a six-pointed star, and today the Jews call it the Star of David. But the encyclopedias will show you that a six-pointed star is a hex, and it will tell you that it was originally the star of Saturn. All right, so in the ancient world, a priest would draw a circle on the ground and draw a triangle, and then they would draw another triangle upside down it from this, going the other way, which forms a six-pointed star. And then they would be able to step inside of this circle and into the star, and from there cast a spell on you. And so the idea was they were putting a hex on you in this manner. This is where the term hexing and putting a hex on you comes from. All right, let's have a look at NASA. In 1977, NASA sent out the Voyager spacecraft, and as that I was going to say spaceship, but it's actually satellite, moved out into space, it passed over Saturn. And as it passed over Saturn, It just happened to go close to the north pole of Saturn, and for some reason, if you examine pictures from NASA of Saturn, on the north pole of Saturn is actually a hexagram, a massive six-pointed hexagram on the north pole. And scientists cannot explain why there is a six-pointed star on the north pole of Saturn. However, it is there. What's even worse is to try and explain is how come the Jews knew that Saturn was connected to 6 and a hexagram. How did they know all these many millennia ago? How did they know? Because NASA only confirmed it and only discovered this in 1977. Before that, we didn't know. So somehow or another, the Jews knew that the six-pointed star was connected to Saturn. And as I mentioned, there is no way at all for us to have known this before 1977, when the space probe went across and into space and flew over Saturn. Before then, it's invisible to the naked eye, or even with a telescope, you couldn't really see it. So NASA had explained to us that it was simply a fluke. It was something that just happened, nothing to take seriously, and nothing we should be concerned about. However, 40 years later, when the Cassini craft went out, that same hexagram was again verified. And it's verified that that hexagram is still there on Saturn, on the north pole of it. And it was not a little fluke or a trick of the lens or anything like that. It is actually there on Saturn even today. Do you like Lord of the Rings, that story or the movie? Well, in the motion picture Lord of the Rings, Sauron is portrayed as a massive evil eye. And if you go to the south pole of Saturn, you will see what altogether looks like an all-seeing eye. It really does. However, if you think about the planet Saturn with its rings, and if you turn the angle just right, now the rings look like two separate eyelids with the center circle as the eye. Therefore, there's a lot of mysticism connected to the planet Saturn. The Jewish religion, the Catholic Church, and the Catholic religion, as well as Islam today, has a symbol of Saturn that has dominantly been important, particularly, I should say, to Islam for several centuries. It is a black square or a black cube. Mecca, of course, in Saudi Arabia. Okay, in the black cube, or I should say the black cube represents the planet Saturn. Therefore, a black cube square in Saudi Arabia definitely refers to the planet Saturn. And all over the world, large black cubes and architecture, as well as churches and monasteries, have huge black squares, just like Mecca, somewhere in them at a smaller size. In the movie 2001 Space Odyssey, if we take a look at the original book, actually, which gave birth to this movie, the astronauts were going to the planet Saturn to find this black cube. Here again is the black cube on the planet Saturn. And anyone who studies the dark arts, the dark sciences, or the world of the occult knows that Saturn is very important to the dark side of this world in relation to religion and occultism. Saturn is the inhibitor. It will set you back and teach you a harsh lesson. Therefore, Saturn represents the government, the military, the police department, as well as other government agencies. Going back to Rome, ancient Rome, there was a celebration called the Saturnalia. The Saturnalia was a celebration in Rome for the planet Saturn, and it happened 13 days before the 21st. So it was like 12 to 15 days before the festivity that we now call Christmas. Okay? But this Saturnalia was a 12 day before Christmas event. Well, actually, no, I'll take that back. It was actually 12 days before the event that was formally called Saturnalia, because Saturn in Rome was considered to be the god of chaos. And the god of chaos and chaos itself was another thing that Saturn was known for. So, what the Romans did with worshipping Saturn was that they actually had 12 days of chaos in which the kings and the upper class would bow to their slaves and prisoners. And these slaves and prisoners, if they wanted to, were actually let loose. And they would be in charge of their masters who put them in prison during this time. So it was a temporary arrangement. It was chaotic, and in this festivity celebrated that. They actually went through with it. It was alcohol and sex and drugs, whatever you wanted, could be done on Saturnalia for these 12 days, but 12 days only. So in the Roman Empire, you were free to do whatever it was you wanted on this Saturnalia period. You were given a grace period, whatever class you were back then. If you were at the very bottom, the roles would reverse. Therefore, if you were a slave when Saturnalia came around, you could go into the house of your master, bring out your master and make him or her kiss your feet and bow down to you and shower you with gifts and offerings and absolutely anything you wanted to. You just couldn't take their life or maim them. So the idea was that it was a chaotic time in which all law was just thrown away in the chaos. And now it was up to anybody to do whatever it was they wanted to, and they would go out and get it or take it. Today, we've moved the festivities to December 25th, and it is called Christmas, and there's none of this kind of chaotic thing. It's just an exchange of presents and celebration. So, getting back to the Roman Empire. In the Roman Empire, the Saturnalia was one of the major festivities for Saturn. Then there was another one called Brumalia, which was based on worship of Saturn also. You can actually do further research into that if you like. A very important NASA scientist named Dr. Norman Berggren has written a book called The Ring Makers of Saturn. And in that book, Norman Berggren, the scientist, shows actual pictures taken of the rings of Saturn. And in one particular shot, there is some sort of vehicle, or what looks like a vehicle, a space vehicle, I kid you not. This is before camera effects and Photoshop was created. So I kid you not, that it seems to be creating another ring, this artificial vehicle. So anyway, this ring is not quite finished. So there is a ring on the side, and there's some kind of a gap or space in between it, and it's almost ready to connect the ring, but not quite. So in this book, we have some very beautiful pictures of this. And ultimately, of course, this ring will be connected together, and a new ring will be formed around Saturn. So it seems like that these rings, or some of them, might well be artificial. I know this sounds like a fantastic claim. However, it is in this book written by this NASA scientist. So take a look and form your own conclusion. It looks like that somebody has made these rings. So I'm going to delve further into Saturn and the occult in the next part, but I'm going to finish part 1 here now, so it doesn't get too lengthy. Stay tuned, and I'll continue this talk next time. All right, so have a great weekend or week ahead, and I'll talk to you again soon. Okay, have a good one. Cheers.